Have you noticed that the deepest people in your life are simply vanishing? Not dying, not moving away, disappearing in a quieter, more frightening way. That friend who understood things no one else saw, who asked uncomfortable questions, who stayed silent while everyone else talked. Where are they? Maybe posting generic stories, smiling in that photo where everyone looks interchangeable. Or they just stopped showing up. You feel the absence but can't name what was lost. What's disappearing isn't physical. It's depth. There's a specific type of person being systematically suffocated by modern life. Carl Jung called them introverted intuitives. They're the ones who pick up invisible patterns, sense unspoken truths, hear what silence says. They represent between 1% and 3% of the population. And the society we've built doesn't just ignore these people, it's actively erasing them. Think about your routine. How many moments of true silence have you had today? Not the silence of being alone scrolling through your feed. Silence, where there's no stimulus at all. That silence barely exists anymore. We've been trained to believe that silence is emptiness, when it's the opposite. Silence is where depth is born. For an introverted intuitive, silence is where the mind works connecting invisible dots, sensing underground currents before they manifest on the surface. But in a culture of constant noise, this ability has no value. Those who need time to process are slow. Those who don't respond immediately are antisocial. From childhood, these people learn. Your nature is a problem to be fixed. When Jung developed his psychological typology, he was mapping fundamental differences in how humans perceive reality. Introversion means having psychic energy turned inward. Extroversion is energy turned outward. But there's another layer to this story. There are different functions of perception. Some process the world through the concrete, what can be touched and measured now. Jung called this sensation. And some perceive first the possibilities, the patterns not yet manifested, the hidden meanings between the lines. That's intuition. When you combine introversion with dominant intuition, you have someone whose primary perception comes from internal insights about invisible patterns. Someone who lives in a world most people can't see. Jung warned that modern Western culture developed a brutal preference for extroversion and sensation. What matters is what can be shown, touched, measured now. Everything internal, symbolic, or deep is marginalized because it doesn't serve the objectives of a society organized around consumption and spectacle. Introverted intuitives don't try to be different. They simply are. They pick up what's not being said. They walk into a room and feel the tension no one mentions. They read news and notice implications months ahead. This isn't magic. It's processing at levels that ordinary consciousness ignores. You grow up hearing that you overthink, that you complicate things. And look, I know you've felt this before. That moment where you share a deep perception and people look at you like you're speaking another language. Gradually, you learn to shut down, to ignore what you perceive. Because every time you try to share deep intuition, you meet blank stares. People don't want to know the marriage is crumbling before the obvious signs. They don't want to hear the company will fail when the numbers look good. They don't want to discuss philosophical implications of how they live. They want the surface. And if you insist on going deep, you become inconvenient. So you stop trying. Another deep voice disappearing into the noise. In 1967, Guy Debord published The Society of the Spectacle. We live where everything needs to be performance, appearance, image. Real life became rehearsal for performed life. You don't go to a restaurant to eat. You go to post. Substance was replaced by its image. For an introverted intuitive, this is existential nightmare. Their real life happens in the invisible, in connections made walking alone, in insights from the silence of dawn. How do you perform depth? You can't. What remains is brutal choice. Create a false persona or disappear from visibility. Both are forms of disappearance. Modern capitalist culture has a supreme commandment: produce, and produce something visible, measurable. Your value as a person is determined by productivity. Contemplation doesn't produce anything visible. Deep reflection doesn't generate reports. So contemplation died. It was replaced by performative productivity. You need to always be doing something that looks useful. Introverted intuitives need internal time, not as luxury, but as basic psychic necessity. They process information differently. They absorb experiences and need time to digest, to connect, to extract meaning. This happens in the apparent void, in time that seems wasted. But there's no space for this in a culture of constant urgency. You wake up and there are already messages waiting. You work all day being interrupted. You come home exhausted. And on the weekend, there's social pressure to do something visible, shareable. Because if you stayed home alone without doing anything publicly recognizable, you wasted your time. But it was precisely in that apparently wasted time that the greatest thinkers made their discoveries. Newton saw gravity resting under a tree. Einstein had insights daydreaming. Jung developed his psychology in contemplative solitude. Depth requires empty time. It requires boredom. It requires absence of stimulus. Everything modern culture considers a waste of time is what creates true genius. When you force an introverted intuitive to always be producing visibly, always available, you're stealing the possibility of connection with deep layers of the psyche. And without access to those layers, there's no real insight. There's only repetition. Originality dies where contemplation is forbidden. In a society that measures everything by immediate productivity, we're killing the capacity to create something truly new. But there's something no one tells you about work environments. They actively punish those who need contemplation. You're in a meeting, and someone asks a question. They expect an immediate answer. If you pause to think, to really process the complexity, you've already lost credibility. Reflective silence is read as incompetence, so you learn to have instant opinions about everything, even if superficial. Because a quick wrong answer is worth more than a slow right one. And there's that bizarre moment no one admits. You're in that meeting and they ask a question about something complex. You'd already thought about it weeks ago, already processed all the variables, but you pretend you're thinking about it now. Because if you answer right away, they'll think you didn't think it through. So you perform the contemplation that already happened. Another layer of falseness that distances you from who you are. The modern educational system was designed to produce obedient workers. Sit in rows, stay quiet, answer fast, follow the schedule, don't question too much. We reward speed and obedience. We punish reflective slowness and divergent thinking. For an introverted, intuitive child, this system is torture disguised as education. They need time to absorb, to connect, to find patterns, to generate real understanding. But there's no time. The teacher has already moved to the next topic, so they learn to memorize without understanding. Have you noticed something strange? That child sitting by the window looking outside while the teacher explains the formula on the board. Everyone thinks they're distracted, but they're not absent. They're on another plane of understanding. They're seeing the birds out there and thinking about migration, about instinct, about how something so small knows how to cross continents. And meanwhile, the teacher is repeating that 7 times 8 is 56 for the 10th time. They already knew that. But they're somewhere else, at a level of questioning that the curriculum doesn't reach and doesn't want to reach. These children are seen as problematic. Teachers say they don't pay attention when they're absorbing at levels that superficial teaching doesn't recognize. They say they're distracted when they're processing connections the curriculum ignores. The system doesn't adapt. The child is forced to adapt, even if that means crushing their nature. Constant group work is another nightmare. There's always someone more vocal dominating the conversation. They learn to silence their deepest perceptions, to accept superficial solutions, to value quick consensus over difficult truth. Another voice disappearing before it's even fully formed. Social media seems democratic, but algorithms aren't. They're designed to maximize engagement, which comes from content that generates immediate reaction. The faster you capture attention, the more the algorithm rewards you. The more you post, the more you exist. Frequency is visibility. Silence is death. For an introverted intuitive, this logic is anti-natural. They don't have something meaningful to say every day. They process for weeks before reaching a conclusion worth sharing. When they finally speak, it's dense, deep, nuanced. It doesn't fit in a 15-second story. And in the economy of digital attention, that's not viable. The algorithm doesn't reward depth. It rewards frequency and superficiality. And let me tell you something no one admits. It's 2 in the morning and you're lying in bed, with your phone's light illuminating your face. Infinite scroll. You've already seen 50 posts, 100 posts. You don't remember any of them, but you keep searching. Searching for what? Something that makes sense. Something that touches that depth you know exists. But you only find more quick recipes for happiness, more empty motivational phrases, more people performing perfect lives. And you know you have a deep thought wanting to come out. Something real. But you also know it doesn't fit in digital format. That if you try to truly express it, you'll need paragraphs, nuance. And no one has time. So you turn off your phone. And you stay there, in the dark, with that weight in your chest. But wait, because there's a cost to this that goes far beyond what it seems. And that's what we need to talk about now. Two options remain. Either you play the social media game the required way, post every day, simplify ideas until they become slogans, perform a fake version of yourself, or you stay invisible. And invisibility on social media has real consequences. Opportunities that don't appear, connections that don't form, validation that doesn't happen. In a world where online presence is increasingly equivalent to real presence, not existing digitally is almost not existing socially. But the cost of existing digitally the wrong way is worse. You force yourself to post banalities, to simplify complex thoughts until they lose meaning. And gradually, you start thinking in terms of metrics, likes, shares, comments, numbers that don't reflect understanding, just superficial reaction. Before having an experience, you're already thinking about how you'll post it. Your mind, made to dive deep, is swimming in circles on the surface. You've become a slave to a validation system designed for extroverted sensorials, and the more you try to fit in, the more you drift from who you are. Jung developed a crucial concept, the transcendent function. It's the psychic capacity to hold tension between opposites without prematurely resolving it, allowing synthesis, insight, new meaning to emerge naturally. You know when you're in the shower and suddenly understand something you'd been trying to solve for days? That. It didn't come from you forcing an answer. It came from you holding the question long enough for the unconscious to work on it. It's what happens when you hold contradiction in your mind without forcing an answer, and suddenly a deeper understanding appears that integrates both sides. This function only operates under specific conditions. You need silence, internal space, time without pressure to resolve quickly. Introverted intuitives have natural access to this function. Their mind lives in tensions, in paradoxes. They don't feel comfortable with quick answers because they sense reality is more complex. They let the problem ferment internally until something deeper reveals itself. This process created all great art, philosophy, science. It's literally how genius works. But modern culture doesn't allow this process. It demands immediate answers, quick decisions, clear and binary positions. You're this or that, you agree or disagree. There's no space to say you're still thinking. That's seen as weakness. And this is dying. The transcendent function atrophies. In an environment of constant urgency, the unconscious can't do the deep work. Symbols don't emerge. Insights don't appear. What remains is superficial consciousness, literal, incapable of perceiving deeper layers. Jung warned that a psyche without access to the symbolic becomes sick. It loses orientation, loses meaning. When you collectively kill the transcendent function, you create a psychotically literal culture. Everything is taken at surface value. Metaphors are misunderstood. Myths are primitive lies. Art is judged by aesthetic criteria, never by capacity to touch unconscious layers. Everything loses depth. And in a culture without depth, the deep ones die of spiritual starvation. In the tarot, the hermit is the archetype of one who withdraws to seek inner light. They don't flee from fear. They withdraw from spiritual necessity. They know certain truths can only be found in solitude. Eventually, they return. But they come back transformed, bringing wisdom that only solitude cultivated. This archetype has always existed, and every healthy culture respected this. But modern culture lost this understanding. Solitude became social failure. Being alone is evidence that something's wrong with you. There's constant pressure to be connected. Go out, socialize, show up. If you spend the weekend alone, friends ask if everything's okay. If you refuse invitations repeatedly, they start to worry. And look, I'm not saying it's easy to go against this. Culture confuses superficial connection with true intimacy. For an introverted intuitive, This pressure is suffocating. They don't recharge energy by socializing. They spend energy socializing. They need time alone as basic psychic necessity. It's where they process experiences, integrate insights, reconnect with the true self. Without this time, they become exhausted, fragmented. But when they try to explain, they're rarely understood. So they yield to pressure. They socialize more than their nature can handle, and they get sick silently. Contemporary public space is dominated by binary discourse. Complex issues are simplified into opposing positions. You're left or right. You agree or disagree. There's no space for nuance, for paradox, for recognizing that reality rarely divides into clean categories. Introverted intuitives naturally think in nuances. They see various sides, angles no one considers. They perceive internal contradictions in positions people defend with absolute certainty. But when they try to bring this complexity to public conversations, they're silenced. Accused of making false equivalents, of not having courage to take a position, or simply ignored. Memes replaced arguments. Slogans replaced thought. You need to summarize complex positions in 140 characters, or they don't exist. Depth became inconvenience. Thinking too much became a defect. And whoever insists on pointing out complexities is quickly marginalized as a complicator. So these voices simply stop speaking publicly. Every time they try to contribute something deep, they find disinterest or hostility. Eventually, they learn their most valuable perceptions have no place. So they fall silent. If you're enjoying this content, check out in the first comment our exclusive ebook, Alchemy and Archetypes. Jung said everyone uses personas, social masks. This is normal and necessary. The problem happens when the persona completely replaces the true self. For introverted intuitives living in a culture that rejects their nature, this problem is almost inevitable. To survive socially, they build elaborate personas that imitate extroversion and practicality. They learn to make small talk even though they find it painful. They force smiles. They fake interest in superficial conversations. They simulate energy they don't have. All to seem normal. And it might seem like you're exaggerating, but you're not. You know exactly the weight of this. And there's something about this exhaustion that almost no one notices. Something that's happening at a much deeper level. The psychic cost of this is brutal. Each interaction where you perform a false version drains vital energy. It's not just social tiredness. It's dissociation. It's being physically present but internally absent. It's that moment where you're in front of the mirror and don't recognize who's performing. You see the face, recognize the features, but the person behind the eyes seems like a stranger. Because you spent so much time being the mask that you completely forgot who's underneath it. It's feeling like you're playing a character all the time. This isn't sustainable. You know that. You feel it in your bones. Eventually, something breaks. Many reach exhaustion that goes beyond professional. It's existential exhaustion. Burnout of the soul. You spent so much energy maintaining the mask that nothing was left to nourish who you really are. When the mask finally falls, what remains? Sometimes, almost nothing. I know it's hard to hear this, but you need to know you're not alone in this feeling of dissolving inside while keeping everything perfect on the outside. We live in a brutal paradox. We have access to more information than any previous generation. And yet, there's desperate hunger for wisdom. Because information isn't wisdom. Having access to millions of articles doesn't mean understanding anything. Excess information prevents wisdom because there's no time to digest. You consume fragments without ever integrating. You know superficially about everything without deeply understanding anything. The thirst increases, the water disappears. Introverted intuitives are seekers of meaning. They're not satisfied with pure information. They need understanding that connects everything. But culture offers only infinite entertainment, quick dopamine, constant distraction. If you stop, you notice the emptiness. You notice you consumed tons of content, but retained nothing meaningful. You know there's depth available. You feel your mind was made to dive deep. But the entire structure of modern life conspires against this. Work demands hours, commuting, little time left. And you're exhausted. So you yield to the easy option, Netflix, YouTube, social media. And you go to sleep feeling empty. It's like dying of thirst next to a well you don't have energy to open. Late capitalism colonized even private time. There's always something you should be doing. A new skill, a side project, an exercise routine. Even leisure became productive. Contemplative time was delegitimized. Just thinking is wasting time. Walking without destination is unproductive. And if you ignore urgencies to have contemplative time, you feel guilt, but you can't stop. You can never stop. For introverted intuitives, this time isn't luxury, it's basic necessity. Jung spent years in deliberate retreat where he allowed images to emerge naturally. From that apparently unproductive period, his entire psychology was born. When you steal contemplative time, you're cutting off access to deep layers of the psyche. The unconscious needs space to speak. It doesn't speak during meetings. It speaks in silence. Without this access, the connection with depth breaks. But here's what changed everything. What made people start waking up? Many introverted intuitives are having an awakening, realizing they're not broken. You're not imagining things. The system that rejects them is what's sick. This perception is liberating and devastating. Liberating because it allows you to stop trying to fix yourself. Devastating because it brings profound loneliness. When you see what others don't see, you become a foreigner in your own culture. This awakening usually comes after some collapse. Burnout that forces a pause. Existential crisis that can no longer be ignored. It's that specific instant where something clicks. You're in the middle of another useless meeting, another empty social event, and suddenly, with brutal clarity, you realize, there's nothing wrong with me. The mistake is trying to fit into a world that wasn't made for depth. It's relief and terror simultaneously. Relief because finally you can stop blaming yourself. Terror because now you know that either you change everything or you'll die inside. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming who you really are. It's painful because it requires letting go of everything that was false. It requires confronting repressed parts. It requires accepting you may never fit completely. But it's also the only path to real authenticity. The awakening of introverted intuitives isn't an organized movement. It's a distributed phenomenon. People waking up in isolation and finding others. Realizing they're not alone in feeling the world went crazy. And from this perception comes active refusal. Refusal to continue performing falseness. Refusal to sacrifice depth at the altar of social acceptance. This is where it gets interesting. Reclaiming solitude, not as punishment, but as spiritual necessity. It requires recognizing that for an introverted intuitive, solitude isn't emptiness. It's sacred space where depth happens. Claiming solitude as a right is a revolutionary act. It means saying no to invitations without guilt. It means spending the weekend alone and considering that time well spent. Practices help. Deep journaling, solitary walks without phone, non-commercialized meditation, time without digital stimuli. This isn't escapism. It's essential psychic maintenance. Jung protected his inner time fiercely. And it was precisely this refusal that allowed genius to emerge. Solitude doesn't mean total isolation. It means quality over quantity. One true connection is worth more than 1,000 superficial interactions. The solution isn't forcing yourself to socialize superficially. It's seeking the rare others who also live in depth. They exist. I bet you've felt this. That rare moment where you meet someone and in minutes feel more connection than in years of superficial friendships. Small, intentional communities where real conversations happen are infinitely more valuable than large networks. It could be a reading group, a writing circle, a few friends where you really share what's happening inside. Relationships where silence is comfortable. This requires letting go of relationships that drain. It's scary. It means periods of even greater solitude. But it's necessary, because while your time is drained by empty relationships, there's no space to cultivate the deep ones. When you find your tribe, those few people who really see you, you realize it was worth it. One real conversation nourishes more than years of superficial interactions. A few true friends are worth more than hundreds of acquaintances. Here's the truth. Introverted intuitives aren't disappearing from weakness. They're being tested. And no one talks about this openly, but there's a mission in this. Jung spoke about the collective unconscious, a deep layer shared by all humanity. He believed it needs individuals who keep alive the connection with these depths. When an entire culture disconnects from the symbolic, it's the introverted intuitives who keep the thread alive between collective consciousness and its deep roots. You know what I'm talking about, right? It's not about superiority, it's about responsibility. If you perceive what others don't perceive, you have an obligation to cultivate it. Culture may not recognize it now, it may even punish. But at a deep level, it needs people who haven't lost touch with depth. Each one who resists conformity keeps alive a flame that culture will need. When the emptiness of superficiality becomes unbearable, they'll look for those who never forgot the way. Plato told the allegory of the cave. Prisoners see only shadows thinking they're reality. One escapes, sees the real world, returns to free the others. But when he tries to explain, he's ridiculed. The prisoners prefer the comfortable lie. Introverted intuitives live a variation of this. They saw depth that most don't see. When they try to share, they meet resistance. It's tempting to give up. Many do. But something inside dies when you betray what you know to be true. The alternative requires double movement. First, dive even deeper into yourself. Don't flee from your own nature, but embrace it. Go deeper into introversion, into intuition. This intensifies loneliness temporarily, but it also intensifies authenticity. You stop apologizing for who you are. Second movement. Offer the world what you find in that depth. Don't disappear from shame or conform from fear, but exist authentically, even misunderstood. Be available for those who search, speak truth when appropriate, create work that expresses depth. You don't need to convince anyone. You don't need to be accepted by the majority. You just need to be faithful to what you perceive, create from what you feel. This automatically serves a function in the collective unconscious. Because even if few see consciously, everyone feels subconsciously when they encounter real authenticity. Your simple, non-conformed existence plants seeds, shows possibility, keeps the door open. A culture that marginalizes depth needs to change. But change doesn't happen by decree. It happens when enough people start living differently. When they refuse to play the established game. When they create islands of depth in an ocean of superficiality. These islands eventually connect. Jung spent his life developing psychology that honored depth. He was ridiculed. He was misunderstood. He died without seeing his ideas accepted. But he continued. And decades later, his work influences millions. Because he refused to mediocrize his soul. He maintained fidelity to depth, even when that meant isolation. At the end of his life, Jung said, "I am my memory." Not his external achievements, not his reputation, but the totality of his internal experience, deeply processed, consciously integrated. You are also your memory. You are the depth you cultivated. You are the insights you had in solitude. You are the perceptions no one validated but you know are true. You are every moment you chose authenticity over acceptance, depth over popularity. Don't negotiate this. Don't trade your depth for crumbs of social validation. Don't mediocrize your soul trying to fit in. The world doesn't need another copy. It needs you whole, deep, authentic. Because it's precisely from the margins that transformation begins. Introverted intuitives aren't disappearing from inevitable extinction. They're being forced to choose, conform and die internally, or resist and live authentically. Each one who chooses the second option is doing essential work. You're not alone in this. There are others crossing the same desert. And on the other side, there's something worth every moment of solitude. Your own soul, whole and true, finally free to be what it always was. Before you go, subscribe to the channel. There's new content every week that'll make you think differently. Leave a like on this video. It helps more people find these ideas. And if you want to go even deeper, join the Members Club where we dive into these questions in even more profound ways. Until next time.